Hi, today we are in Redwood City in the Sumo Logic office. Hi Christian, who are you and what do you do?
I'm the CTO and co-founder of Sumo Logic, we've been building this company for the last 5.5 years. We got started in early 2010. We now have our own office here in the beautiful Redwood City, having 2 full floors full of people. It's very exciting. We have we've got sales crowd, we've got engineering crowd, all the in-between folks that you need to make a great company.
Cool. Christian, you have a super interesting life story. So starting from Germany, how did you come to the US and how did you move from startups to your own startup?
Yeah, I came to the US in an airplane that was flying into Seattle in late '98, and I was extremely anxious and I really wanted to turn around and go back. So why was that going on and why was I going to Seattle? Well, I was a student at Fachhochschule Brandenburg, and so if you go to a School of Applied Sciences in Germany anyways, in the 7th semester they'll kick you out and you need to basically do an internship. And so I ended up, this is a really kind of convoluted and long story, but I, through lots of hoops, etc., I ended up with a bunch of guys who got acquired by Amazon, in order to sort of bootstrap Amazon.de, and this was called Telebuch back then. And the acquisition had just happened, and as an intern, they basically just said, "Hey, why don't you come with us to Seattle and we'll build something of some sort, right?" And so I was actually at Amazon then in late '98 in downtown Seattle. They didn't even have proper offices yet. They were like spread all across the city. I remember I was like walking down, I think, 1st or 2nd Street with like literally compact servers on the road. Like, it's ridiculous. And so that was basically a 6 months thing where it was super interesting, and this was really the first time that I kind of programmed sort of as a, I guess, quote unquote professional, having done some stuff in school before. But anyway, so. From there, we helped me and another intern who is actually also, he's not here today, otherwise I would introduce you to him. His name is Stefan, he's another German guy,
Okay.
And I've been working with him ever since, and he's our chief architect here. So basically, we helped this founder guy to work on one of his ideas, which was sort of a German to English sort of translator and vocabulary training service. Fast forward, that didn't really go very well. There were some differences between people, and but we had met this lady who came over from Miami to Berlin to help out, because now this was actually a 2-continent story, but then people kind of fell apart, as it sometimes goes when there's like all of this, when you mix too many people too quickly and all of this pressure and whatnot. So she had this idea that people should just be able to store their files in the internet. Like upload them to the web server. People didn't really have laptops yet, so and certainly they didn't have USB sticks, right? And so you would go sort of from internet cafe to internet cafe, and then you go home and then to the office, etc. And sharing your stuff even with yourself wasn't super easy. So in other words, essentially this what you know today as Dropbox, right? And so it's a great idea. We thought, let's do it, and we started that company together with her in Florida. In Miami, actually, and she was responsible for running things and bringing the money in, and Stefan and I started building the sort of product and engineering and so forth, and but we had no idea what we were doing, and we ran it into the ground really like this. Timing was not great. I mean, it was like in 2000, and but that's not really an excuse. It was really us. We then ended up going around and sort of making the rounds with a bunch of VCs. Both on the East Coast and the West Coast. Of course, we came to San Francisco, Silicon Valley. Nobody wanted to give us any money, but my resume kind of was left behind. And there was this VC who ended up at the same time, who actually had just incubated this company called ArcSight. Mm-hmm. This was basically in early 2001. And they, so somehow they got my resume. They were looking for technical people. They interviewed me, they flew me out here, and I got the job. And I was like, this is very cool. I remember them actually. To this day, I remember that day of interviewing with them, and they completely blew my mind. It was by far the smartest people I've ever met. Yeah. And I was like, oh wow, there's something really cool going on here. This is definitely a cool place. And So they paid for the relocation, and we threw all of our, and like I actually, me and another German guy, anyways, I will skip over that. And so we threw all our stuff in a big, moving, a truck, and we hopped on a plane, and then in early 2001, I was starting to work at ArcSight in Silicon Valley, living in San Jose, and so I've been here ever since.
And how did this story unfold until really you started Sumo Logic, and how did you come up with this idea?
If you are working in a particular field, right, and in my case, so ArcSight was a company that was dealing a lot with security information management. So ArcSight basically did log management for security, and so I was actually there for 9 years. The company was successful. Mm-hmm. It was actually a really cool story. I was an early employee. There was like opportunity for growth. I eventually became the chief architect and all of these kinds of things, and so. You kind of get steeped in the domain to some degree, right? And then at some point you start realizing that, hey, I might not know a whole lot, but when it comes to, say, in my particular case, log management, then, there are probably not necessarily another million people out there that know as much as I do. And I've observed sort of the goods and bads about how to do this product, right, for 9 years, right? And so did a bunch of other folks at ArcSight that I've always been working with, and so Kumar, who is now my co-founder here at Sumo, and I basically started putting together this idea that there's a lot of good things and there's a lot of bad things about how ultimately 9 years in, about how we approach the product stuff at ArcSight, and if we can improve on the things that didn't really work so well, given that there's a lot of good things, including there's a huge target market and so forth, and there's expansion capability, maybe we have the hypotheses behind a sort of next generation company, and that was basically it. And we basically were trying to improve on the delivery model. ArcSight was still enterprise software, so you would give the software to the customer, and it just turns into a shit show. You lose, as a developer or as a vendor, you lose control, right? Mm-hmm. And without control, helping a customer, like making the system really fly, is very hard. And it also ends up, unfortunately, I felt that it also sort of ended up kind of stopping sort of the innovation capabilities of the company, because with enterprise software, once the software has left the building, it'll never die, right? And there will always be people that still use it, and they want to, they want fixes and patches, and then suddenly you basically spend all of your time with every new version. It gets worse because the old versions never die, and then all of your engineering and time that you would have to build new cool stuff gets kind of soaked up in backporting and supporting existing customers. And so we wanted to fix that, and so that's why we said, hey, this has to be a service, right? So the cloud stuff was just coming up. Of course, people had done SaaS before. That's clearly not our idea. We saw the applicability for it for our field, I guess, and we were, as usual, when you do stuff like that, and I remember the same was true for ArcSight. Oh, you can't possibly do this. I was like, no way you can do it. And I'm like, well, I think we can do it. You have to be a little bit stubborn, I guess, and you just gotta be, high on your own supply, I guess, to some degree. A certain amount of arrogance is warranted. Like, you gotta really believe into it, right? And so we ended up having a very good relationship with a VC from Greylog. His name is Hashim Chandna, and he helped us along tremendously, because he was really the only person that we had talked to that had sort of a similar idea that came to him, based on his understanding of the market and where things were going. Most of the other VCs didn't even know what fucking log management is, right? And so, they ended up funding us, and in early 2010, and we did a proper Series A. We raised $5 million, and that essentially more or less overnight put the company on the map. And we started going through all the things that you need to do as a company.
Question, and describe what was it like the first 3 to 12 months? So what have you been focusing on, and when did you talk to the investors?
We basically went through a little bit of sort of, just basically getting to know people, right? When I decided to quit ArcSight, that was basically at the end of 2009. Kumar, who was at Mint.com, and Mint.com just got acquired into Intuit, and he was really not a big company guy, so he wanted to actually get out of there. So we basically were both sitting there with nothing to do, right? And we started really kind of gelling on the idea. and ramping up our relation, talking to some of the VCs, going to all the various places in Palo Alto where you have to go to meet VCs, and but through the whole thing, Ashim really stuck out as the guy who really was the only one who really understood what we were all about, and then basically, so there was this give or take a 3 months period to Series A. So we got very lucky there because we found somebody who really kind of, believed in the idea and who felt that we were equipped to execute on this, at least as the very kernel, right, of a company, considering both of our histories. Kumar was at Oxford for the same amount of time, just basically domain experts, I guess, right? And so I think this is probably not a very classic story, because sometimes you have to go out and endlessly convince people, and ultimately, VCs make decisions in very interesting ways, right? And I understand this better today, but if you have somebody who almost felt like, hey, this company should exist, right? And then if you show up and you kind of basically have the same idea, and and you offer yourself as, because the VC themselves, they have to find people, they can't do the company themselves, right? There's always more people involved. So in many ways, the stars aligned really well for us there. So we got really lucky, I think, and great mentorship and, and all of that. So so that was the story. It happened, it happened pretty quickly, actually. We didn't have anything built. We had no product, right? We had, we barely had slides. We got a lot of mentoring, and then how to basically put the slides together, from Ashim, and then, he basically ran us through the partnership and, make sure, basically check all the boxes. And then ultimately there was a partner meeting, and I think it was March, like last week of March on a Monday, and we went there, and I think we didn't totally blow it up, and we were sitting at a BJ's, like having some shitty lunch, and got a call. It's like, yeah, okay, they all agree, let's do it. So it's
awesome.
like, wow.
Cool.
So yeah, that's pretty much a rocket kind of. Yeah, it's like being strapped to a rocket, right? Really, yeah.
Question. Let's talk about the business model of Sumo Logic. So who are basically your customer segments, and what type of value proposition are you delivering to them?
Right. In many ways, the people that we are selling to are working in IT in general, right? So, they might be IT operations folks, they might be developers, they might be, this new kind of unicorn that's called DevOps, and they might also be people who worry about, information security, both from the compliance angle as well as to some degree sort of from the hunting angle, like security analytics and those kinds of things, right? So a product really takes logs, which is the fancy term for that is machine data, but it's really that stuff that usually gets dumped on your disk and then overwritten and you lose it. The insight there is that this is very rich information, and if you can find a good way to process it, it'll add a lot of visibility, right? And so our main audience is really, where it really sticks is with folks who have to run applications, right? And that includes the entire stack, right? It's not just the application code. These things are all like, plugged together from, they write some code themselves, and then there's some libraries and frameworks, and then there's the OS, and, sometimes it goes all the way down to the machine. Often, of course, people today do it in the cloud, and they don't really know what a machine is anymore, which is fine too. I haven't seen a data center in 10 years, but there's a lot of sort of, I guess, diagnostic information and runtime information and metrics and so forth that come out of that you can choose to ignore, or you choose to actually make it work for you, right? And Sumo provides a way to basically put all of the stuff that you already have, put it to work. And so folks use it, when things blow up, it's a very easy way to go to one sort of single pane of glass to sort of figure out, as a sort of a troubleshooting exercise, what's the root cause, right? And restore service and all of these things. Of course, we would also, like to help our customers, not always waiting for shit to blow up, but get more proactive. So there's a lot of analytics capabilities in the product. It can take the logs, which are technically not very well structured, transform them into something that you can ultimately aggregate and then usually trend, right? You can wrap alerting around it, and so hopefully you catch the problem the next time before it happens, or at least a little bit, all of these things. And then to go all the way over to the proactive side, we also, and this is kind of another sort of tack that we're taking as a company, apart from being a service, which is quite differentiated still, we really want to take, so basically when you have a system like this, in many ways you are you are building a system that is sitting there waiting for your user to ask you a question, right? And then you need to have a really slick interface for like getting the question expressed to the tool, and then the tool is supposed to come back in like basically the fastest time possible with some sort of answer or some sort of supporting evidence that lets you figure out what actually happened. And that's great because people are good at asking very good questions. But at the same time, there's a lot of data that's there and that probably never gets touched by your questions, right? And there's a lot of questions that you can derive from that data that's otherwise sitting there by running things like machine learning and statistical inference. And so in many ways, the whole sort of learning aspect, like big data aspect. And sometimes that's as simple as just counting, and sometimes that includes rather complicated and algorithmic stuff, etc. Right? And so we provide a bunch of pretty differentiated functionality there, all the way to automatic sort of anomaly detection, which kind of identifies relatively complex anomalous events, across multiple types of logs, etc., and can guide you ideally into a place where it either already gives you basically all the clues you need for an answer, or at least like points you into the direction, right? I think that machines have not really learned yet. Causality is not something that machines can do quite yet. Right. Apparently until like 2039 or so, and then it'll be there, and that's probably, I don't know, either going to be good or really bad. But humans are very good at adding causality, right? And the machines are very good, however, at correlating large amounts of data, which humans are notoriously bad at, right? And so we're basically trying to put the two things together. On top of just making this really slick and having a great tool for answering questions, we also try to sort of fuse or augment the human intellect with what machines can do.
Cool. How did you acquire the first customers? So you got the $5 million, started the product development. When did you start acquiring and looking for customers, and how did you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we started like really putting the team together, engineering and so forth. I think that must have been around June 2010, and then we went the first version, or we basically we came out of stealth and basically we did the go-to-market thing in our launch of the company in January 2012. So let's say that's basically 18 months, right? And so that's the time that it took to build the system, or of the first sort of version, I guess, of the system. There's no versions of the system anymore. It's all this living thing that kind of keeps evolving. But I think we had our first beta customers like about nine months in, when we had some sort of things plugged together that sort of barely worked. How did we find the beta customers? There was a very important person that got added to the team right after the funding, and that's our VP of product, Bruno. And so he was basically the business guy. Both me and Kumar are technical guys, right? And so the funding was like, yeah, it's okay, we'll find you a business guy, right? So we went out and we found Bruno, and he's awesome. And he kind of comes from the space as well, so he has the background. And Bruno did a lot of customer discovery. He's got the MBA background, so he's much more of a among other things, but he's definitely more of a Rolodex person than either me or Kumar are. And I think we did on the order somewhere between 80 or so interviews with people to basically play the idea off of them and wait for them to tell us they were fucking crazy. And most of them didn't actually. The obvious objections came up. Like, what do you do with all the data in the cloud? How do you make it secure, etc. And we started developing, I think, more and more reasonable answers for that. And out of that discussion, eventually, through some connection, basically came somebody who was willing to actually be a guinea pig. And then, of course, we kind of swarmed them, and they were up in the city, and so we spent quite a bit of time with them and on all of that, and then it kind of went from there. But it was basically relationship based, right? And the lesson there is, I guess, is that, and this is pretty obvious, but it was, I guess at least in hindsight to me now, but no matter how good you are as an engineer, or you might think you are, or probably you are, who knows, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're good at running a company. You need more people, right? Especially if you do it the first time around. I think if you're on your third startup or so and you've observed and absorbed and learned, then you can probably impersonate certain roles. But especially if you're kind of a first time or young founder, or maybe even if you just don't give a shit about this other stuff and you just want to build the best possible system and you don't really want to talk to 80 people on the phone, right?
Yeah.
Because that's not really fun. Maybe, then you need to find people that can kind of come and join the team and, become part of the whole that can actually do all of these functions, right? And, it turns out that, even people who can't write code can actually be pretty decent. And so that's kind of what we learned, right? And so Bruno did a fantastic job there, and I mean, a lot of credit really goes to him for getting us, through the, into the beta phase and, all of these things, right? And then, we've got questions before about, so 18 months seems like a long time, right? And it's like, I don't really know. I mean, this is a big heavy lifting kind of system, right? I mean, we are now at a point where we're processing 50 terabytes of new data per day. We have like many, many, many petabytes of data under management. And this is a really like infrastructure heavy data processing play, right? And so it definitely, like even with the help of building, like we have built everything in AWS, and so of course there's a lot of this infrastructure stuff that sort of gets taken care of. So at least we don't have to worry about sort of ping, power, and pipe. But still, I mean, this is a large distributed system, and so that takes a while, right? And so I think actually in retrospect, I think 18 months is not that bad. Of course, today you think that, I mean, depending on what you want to do, you can kind of launch within 3 weeks and all that kind of stuff, right? An MVP here and MVP there. But, we knew exactly what we wanted to build. There was an existing market. We knew basically, I mean, we had a very strong sort of hypothesis as to how to attack. There was no MVP business going on, And this might be our arrogance, I don't know. The company might be in a better shape today if we had done more experimentation or not, I don't know, right? Yeah. But it's in good shape right now. So, our sense was that, this is pretty clear what we had to do. And we set off to do that. And it took 18 months. And it has never stopped since, when you build especially a service. And this is the trade-off that you make, right? When you ship software, it's a false trade-off actually, because when you ship software, you think that, okay, now I'm done with it. But the reality is you never are, right? As a service, now you have the control, but you also have the responsibility for running it, which is still a positive sum game, and I'll do it again, but it's much harder to duck, right? If your shit is down, it's down, right? And that in many ways makes us very similar to a lot of our customers, and so that's actually good. And at the same time, we can also use the product for dog fooding, which is also almost perfect, but yeah.
I mean, there are some different or opinions of people. Some people say, okay, do an MVP in like 1 month and then ship it. Some people say, okay, work on it for 18 months and then ship it. Yeah. But I mean, from my point of view, in the end, it boils down to, can you differentiate based on what you are delivering to the market? Yeah? And if you can differentiate to some other kind of solutions out there in 1 month, ship it. Yeah? If it takes like 18 months to be like 5x, 10x better, then maybe you should invest 18 months. Yeah? What type of learnings did you generate over the last years and at Sumo Logic and other companies before that you can share with other first-time entrepreneurs? Some do's, some don'ts.
So one thing that I learned was you don't have to think that you're an entrepreneur, and you don't necessarily have to wear a T-shirt that says "Fund me." And you do not necessarily have to be on Angel List all day. Yeah. That's one way, right? But you're especially if you have established a little bit of a record in terms of your work history, etc., and even more so, especially if you have managed to be, and this is usually by luck, actually, at least it was in my case. If you are actually part of something that was successful, and if you were actually part of that, and the people will reference you like that, and it's kind of clear that you don't have to be the CEO, but you were an integral part of making this company successful to the best of your abilities, right? Then from the investor's perspective, that counts an awful lot. Yeah. At least a lot of them. Maybe others are looking differently at it, but what really that the reputation. My point is that Kumar and I had established a reputation without even knowing that we had one, if that makes any sense. Yeah. And when we got the VC connections, the right VCs took us seriously in a way that totally blew my mind, right? And because I don't have a personal brand, I don't have a blog, right? I'm not on Instagram or something like that, and that works for some people, but that's just not who I am, and that doesn't matter. Yeah. If you actually can talk intelligently, And if you have a reasonable reputation, especially if it's attached to a successful like company, or if it was a very heroic, unsuccessful company, because that sometimes also happens, right? But if you're real, right, and that's really what they're looking for. At least I think that's what they were looking for, or that's what worked for us in our part, because we know what we know, and we know. I mean, we know that there's things that we don't know. We don't know which those things are, right? But we don't run around, We were basically pitching something that was a logical extension of what we had done before, right? And we had this moment when we were sitting there and we were like, maybe we should build a social, mobile photo sharing app.
Uh-huh.
And then we decided not to do that, which was probably a mistake. But no, I'm kidding. I don't think people would have taken us seriously to the same degree that they took us seriously because we pitched something that was so clearly coming from personal experience, right? So that blew my mind, actually, right? The other thing that I'll say is that when it comes to VCs, of course, there's a huge amount of information asymmetry, etc., and the VCs usually know more than you do, but you have power too, right? And not from a perspective of this has to be a fight, but don't underestimate that, there's a lot of money to go around, right? And that the money needs to be put into people that do work, right? And that gives you power, because if you can basically present yourself as somebody who can take that money and do something reasonable with it, chances are they're going to give it to you, because it's still better than the money sitting there not doing anything, right? Because they need to still return funds, etc. So. And that applies to anybody, I think, who has expertise in a certain area and who might not even be aware, how much that counts, right? And so that for me that was very interesting, right? And really the amount of how important the reputation is, and how badly you can fuck that up if you're basically being a dick to everybody, and people will remember that, right? And the VCs, and the good VCs in particular, they will make a ton of reference calls, and they will find everybody. They'll of course call your references, but the real work goes into finding through their network people that you've worked with that you have not given as a reference, right? Because you might not even, for whatever reason, right? And getting sort of the first degree and second degree kind of opinion, and it matters a lot, right? So generally being decent is actually not a bad idea. I guess that's one way to do it. You can also be a total dick to everybody. But that did not, the way that I saw it was like, reputation really matters. So,
Christian, thank you so much for your time and for your insights. And next time you're thinking about starting a company and actually you don't have a clue which problem you want to solve, maybe it's a good idea to build some kind of reputation and knowledge at some other cool, innovative companies. Learn from that, get into some specific area where you have awesome knowledge, and then maybe you find a bigger problem in this area and start a company then. Sure.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, man.